Come la racconto questa? Io vorrei che la mia vita fosse un racconto straordinario, vorrei che fosse costellata da incontri meravigliosi e esperienze fantastiche. È come se stessi vivendo la mia vita come un romanzo d'avventura. E proprio oggi sto per scrivere un capitolo spaziale perché sono a Houston e sto per entrare nel centro spaziale della NASA, il Johnson Space Center, che è in realtà uno dei posti più segreti del mondo, non ci può entrare nessuno. E come se non bastasse, avrò l'onore di incontrare l'astronauta Luca Parmitano, che è l'astronauta più importante della storia italiana. Questa è una di quelle storie che racconterò come un disco rotto ai miei figli e ai miei nipoti, e spero anche ai miei bisnipoti, perché la vita è meravigliosa e voglio vivere il più possibile per godermela. Ok, adesso mi devo calmare perché mi sta per venire a prendere in hotel Ken Bollweg, che è il coordinatore generale di tutte le missioni nello spazio. Praticamente lui giornalmente coordina e guida gli astronauti nello spazio, mentre oggi viene a prendermi con la sua macchinina e mi guida dentro il centro spaziale della NASA.
Ken!
Hey, Giuseppi! How you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I'm really excited. I'm like shaking.
We've got a fun day planned.
It's not gonna be a touristy tour.
Today you're gonna go inside instead of from the outside. So it's a little, it'll be a little more entertaining.
Okay, I'm ready. We can go.
You gotta wear this at all times, otherwise security people will come take you away in handcuffs and you'll be on the news tonight. So at all times you gotta be wearing this.
You convince me. I'm gonna put it all the time.
Hello! Gotta have your badge ready.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so now this is what makes it all worth coming to this building.
Wow.
That's the Saturn V. So this is a real Saturn V. It was Apollo 19, which never flew. Apollo 18 is at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. But as I said, there's 5 of those engines that you just saw. Those are 5 F1s, 1.5 million pounds of thrust each. So that's 7.5 million pounds of thrust. Now, if you've ever seen old film of Saturn V's taking off, you saw how they took off ever so slowly.
Yeah.
And eventually gained velocity. That's because this entire stack weighed more than 7.5 million pounds at liftoff.
Every time you wonder if it's gonna make it or not, because it goes so slow that you say, let's do it.
That's correct, but the in comparison, the space shuttle got off the ground very quickly. Mm-hmm. In fact, by the time it cleared the launch tower at the Kennedy Space Center, it was already doing 100 miles an hour.
Wow. What's the difference between the space shuttle and this?
So this was planned to take men to the moon. That was the purpose of this vehicle. So you got the Earth. The space shuttle only flies in low Earth orbit, whereas this one would get the vehicle into low Earth orbit, but then it would go off to the moon. So you had to achieve a much higher velocity. Low Earth orbit is about 17,400 miles an hour. Okay? To escape the Earth's velocity, you got to go 25,000 miles an hour. So it's another 7,000 or 8,000 miles an hour faster to get out of the Earth's gravity well and go somewhere else.
Ok, se anche tu sei come me che dici sempre sì ma in realtà non stai capendo una mazza, non ti preoccupare, te lo spiega Ciuseppi. Immaginatevi l'orbita della Terra come un'autostrada spaziale immaginaria. Se vai troppo piano cadi, se vai troppo veloce esci dall'orbita. Per rimanere in orbita la velocità necessaria è di 27.000 km all'ora, proprio come lo Space Shuttle. Invece per scappare dall'orbita terrestre e entrare in quella lunare è necessario accelerare fino a raggiungere 40.000 km all'ora. Esattamente come fece il Saturno V per raggiungere la Luna.
This is one of the most incredible pieces of engineering I've ever been exposed to, especially when you consider, this is before computers. They did all these things hand-drawn, all the calculations were done with slide rules. It was absolutely amazing that they did all this stuff and did it in such an incredibly short time. From Kennedy in 1961 saying going to the moon by the end of this decade and returning.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing.
And to have done it by 1969 is just, it's unbelievable. It should not have been possible, but they did amazing job.
Ok, Ken sta per spiegarmi la storia delle missioni Apollo più importanti. Ricordati bene queste tre cose e diventerai astrofisico in 5 minuti. Il Saturno V è composto da 3 stadi. Il primo fa decollare il vettore, il secondo permette di entrare nell'orbita terrestre e il terzo in quella lunare. Dentro il terzo risiede il modulo lunare, ossia il ragnetto con il quale siamo atterrati sulla Luna. Sulla punta di questo mega razzo c'è la capsula dove si trovano i 3 astronauti.
In 1967 there was the Apollo 1 fire. That was in one of the capsules. It was at the Kennedy Space Center. It was called a plugs out test. So this is a test that they were supposed to show that they could do all the communications they needed to without having anything connected to the Saturn V and the capsule up at the top. They did that test. Unfortunately, there was a short that led to a fire, because you got to remember, at that time the design of the capsule was a pure oxygen environment. So even the slightest spark, the slightest bit of fuel, anything that'll burn, will burn much faster, much more violently in oxygen. The smoke essentially killed the crew in a matter of minutes before they could get out. They made several changes to the capsule because of that. That's when they changed to a 1 atmosphere oxygen-nitrogen mixture like we breathe, air. They made changes to the hatch so they could get out of the capsule quicker if they had to. But 3 guys died in that fire. So Apollo 8, I remember this very well as a child, listening to these guys talk as they orbited the moon on Christmas Eve. It originally was supposed to be another test of flying the Saturn V up there with the lunar module, and they were going to dock with the lunar module, but the lunar module wasn't ready yet. So they came up with the audacious plan to actually go around the moon with this vehicle. From the time they decided to do it to the time they did it was a matter of months, and I mean single-digit months, not like 20 months. It was more like 5. And that they pulled it off so quickly, it was just remarkable to me. The picture of an Earthrise. Rather than a moonrise or a sunrise, it was an Earthrise. And this was a very unexpected photo. They were taking pictures of the moon out the windows, and one of the guys looked out one of their windows and said, "Oh my God, look at that, get this lens." And they quickly got the lens and took the picture that has since become quite famous. So this is now Apollo 9, this is where they docked with the lunar module.
Durante l'Apollo 9 i 3 astronauti testarono per la prima volta l'aggancio del modulo lunare, la manovra più complessa delle missioni Apollo. Il test fu un successo e la conquista della Luna sembrava sempre più fattibile.
This next one is Apollo 10. They wanted to test docking with the module, getting to the moon, having it separate, the lunar module separate from the command module, go on their way down, but then be able to know that they could abort the landing if they needed to. This is the upper stage, and this is the lower stage. So the lower stage essentially becomes your launch platform once you get to the moon. So it comes down. These are all indicators to let you know that you're actually touching the surface of the moon. So you come down and land, and it uses a descent engine. So there's an engine in the middle of this underneath, and that's what they use to come down and land on the moon. But then when you go to launch from the moon, this whole lower half stays there. That's now your launch pad. So there's another engine inside here. The 2 engines sat almost inside each other. So then you would launch this one from the base. But now on Apollo 10, as they were going down, they shut off this engine, separated, and fired this engine to go back up. So they came actually very close to the surface of the moon without landing. And of course,
purpose.
Oh, on purpose, yes. This part crashed into the moon.
Wow.
But that was to show that the safety features, that it would work, that they could do an abort landing and fire this one off the platform while in space orbiting the moon. Each one of these were stepping stones, but each one of these things was another step to what would needed to be done with Apollo. Okay, so this of course was Apollo 11.
And can you explain me quickly all the stages? So
Okay.
just to...
Povero Ken, è la 4ª volta che gli chiedo di rispiegarmi gli stadi del Saturno V. Avrà sicuramente pensato, ma chi me l'ha fatto fare?
So this is the first stage. This has the 5 F1 engines putting out 7.5 million pounds of thrust. This gets you started off the planet, gets this other huge mass up in the air. And then the second stage is what gets you into low Earth orbit. So the first stage gets you up off the planet, and then you drop it off. The second stage gets you into low Earth orbit. So now you're orbiting the Earth. So now you check everything out. Okay, it's all good. Now you fire the third stage, which is this one here, and that's what is now sending you to the moon. So you're going from 17,400 miles an hour to 25,000 miles an hour. So you can go on your way to the moon, which takes about 2 days to get there.
E da questo momento in poi, a 384.400 km di distanza dalla Terra, si scriveva la storia. Il 20 luglio 1969 Neil Armstrong e Buzz Aldrin atterravano sulla Luna per la prima volta, grazie a anni di preparazione e ricerca, vincendo la corsa allo spazio contro l'Unione Sovietica.
So now this is Apollo 12. This is the one that got a little exciting on launch because lightning struck the vehicle as it was going up, and it basically shut down the command module. So now these guys are on this rocket and they can't monitor anything. Of course, the electronics, there's electronics all throughout this thing, and the electronics to control the ascent at that point is actually located back in these sections. So the rocket kept running while the guys in the capsule were blind. You know, because the lightning bolt had shut them down. Fortunately, they were able to reset everything and to get it going again while they were still ascending. But can you imagine how exciting that must have been? Suddenly lightning strikes and your whole vehicle's dead and you're riding this rocket. That had to be amazing.
Maybe not for them, they would have been very scared.
They would have been petrified.
Yeah.
But we train. In fact, the guy on the ground that remembered what to do. It was one of the flight controllers at Mission Control, which you'll go to later. One of the flight controllers there remembered what needed to be done and had them throw the right reset procedure so that they could bring the whole module back up again. Okay, Apollo 13. So Apollo 11 took place, and of course everyone was excited. Everybody that had a TV on the planet watched. Apollo 12, yeah, that was pretty neat as well, but okay, it's already been done. By the time they got to Apollo 13, everybody had a sort of whatever attitude. People have already done this before. So it was largely ignored until they had a failure. So this is on their way there. This gets you started to the moon, and then you let this part go too. So now you're just coasting. Now there's a part down there, you'll see it in a little bit, that opens up like a rose petal, and then the command and service module comes back and docks with the lunar module. Okay, so they just completed doing that, and they're still on their way to the moon at 25,000 miles an hour. And they're going along, and at one point they had to do something which was stirring the oxygen tanks, and there was a short. And the tank exploded. Okay, and when it exploded, it blew off the whole side of the spacecraft. Now, of course, they didn't know this at the time. They just heard a big boom. And that's in the famous lines, "Houston, we have a problem." Well, they started losing power like crazy because they had blown up one of their oxygen tanks. So everything started going wrong. But fortunately, they had already docked with the lunar module. If this had happened beforehand, this would be a completely different story. They never would have gotten home. In fact, they would have just continued off into space, and they'd still be doing it today. When that blew off, it disabled this engine. This is their engine to get home. This is what brings you back from the moon, back toward Earth. Now they have no engine. On the other end, you now have the lunar module. So on their way to the moon, they decided, all right, we're going to fire the descent engine of the lunar module when they get on the other side of the moon, and we're going to use that to send the whole stack back to Earth, which had never been done before. It had actually been talked about as a contingency procedure, but how do you test it? There's no way. Everything was different, and they had to learn how to do it real time. There's only about 100 things that should have prevented them from getting back to Earth, and they worked their way through all of them. It was a miracle. It was absolutely a miracle that the Apollo 13 astronauts came back. It was incredible. So Apollo 14 did several more experiments on the moon, but they could only go so far. They used this modularized equipment transporter. It was basically something they could use to kind of cart things around. After that, they had the lunar dune buggy, as they called it, the four-wheel drive vehicle that they drove around with. That allowed them to go much farther than what they could walk. You see, Apollo 15 was the first one that had the dune buggy. 15, 16, and 17 had the rover.
Okay.
So again, remember what I said, this is now the third stage. Again, first stage, get you started. Second stage gets you in the low Earth orbit. Third stage is now pushing you toward the moon. But again, all of this is thrown away.
Where are they going?
This is probably still continuing out into space somewhere. That big empty volume you see there is where the lunar module was housed. And then that whole section there that comes down to a cone is what opened up like a flower that exposed the lunar module so the command and service module could dock with it. You've got this whole stack, and the only thing that comes back to Earth is that conical shape, the gumdrop shaped piece right there. That's where the 3 astronauts are riding. On the way back from the moon, after the lunar module has completed docking on this end, now that is let go and it's left in orbit around the moon. Eventually it'll come back in as well and crash into the moon. And then just this part heads back to Earth. And then once you get back into low Earth orbit, you discard that part and only this comes in for a landing with the parachutes and lands in the ocean. This is the part that comes back. You see with the 3 parachutes coming down, splashes down in the ocean. They have all sorts of Navy ships there ready to pick them up.
How do you control that this goes back to the ocean and not to, you know, a city?
Physics. This is all planned trajectory. You know, it's a ballistic trajectory. You know, if you fire a gun, you know, it's going to go up, it's going to come down. Mm-hmm. This is going to go up, and it's going to come down on the other side of the Earth. But it was all planned to make sure it hit the Indian Ocean and no landmass. This shows the chamber that was used in the Apollo days. So there's the Apollo service module and the command module, and this is what we call, these were simulating the sun. So you'd have the sun very bright on one side of the spacecraft, and everywhere else around was very, very cold. And the whole floor on this thing would rotate. So it would be just like what they did in space. They would rotate the spacecraft, and people always wonder, why'd you rotate the spacecraft? It was for thermal reasons. We called it the rotisserie mode. Just like you cook meat on a rotisserie, you do the same thing with spacecraft. So if you got a spacecraft like this, and the sun is shining on one side, and you have the very cold, deep space on the other side, this side will get warm, this side gets cold, and the whole spacecraft will warp. So if you spin it, slowly spin it, it evens it all out. That's the reason why the spacecraft are spinning, so that thermally it becomes much more consistent instead of getting very hot on one side and very cold on the other. So this is how we simulated with the sun on one side and cold on the other side.
But why we are not doing other missions on the moon?
We're working on it now. That's what the Artemis program is about. We're trying to send astronauts back to the moon by 2024. And that's using the SLS, or the Space Launch System, which is an even more powerful rocket than this one. So this is mission control at Johnson Space Center. This is where the famous phrase, failure is not an option, was born. So we're kind of going in the back door right now. So we're going into right now what's called the MIR, or the Mission Evaluation Room. This is where I spent most of my time during the EVAs for AMS. AMS is the Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer. It's a high-energy particle physics experiment on the International Space Station that's studying cosmic rays, dark matter, and antimatter. I first started working on it in 1994 as the chief engineer, eventually became the project manager, and have been doing that for several years. So we monitored everything the crew was doing with the equipment we developed over the last 4.5 years to make sure that it was operating properly, the crews were following the procedures properly, and if there was any sort of anomalies or problems, to help advise the crew what they were supposed to do. So right now, there's not a lot of people in here because, you know, the space station is operating. During an EVA, every one of these stations would be occupied with people. It would be very packed. There's actually a couple dozen rooms like this all throughout these buildings, all supporting the FICR, or the flight control room. That's the main room that you usually see on TV.
Also, compliment yourself very well.
Ken, why there are no windows?
Don't want anybody watching us. This building is very secure for EMI, electromagnetic interference. So that's one of the reasons why there's no windows on it. So welcome to mission control for the space station. Wow. Each one of these stations serves a different function. For instance, the flight director is right here. You can see the sign that says flight director. That's Emily Nelson, who worked with us on the AMS EVAs. Right next to her is the Capcom position. That stands for Capsule Communicator. Capcom is always an astronaut. They want to have someone that has the mindset of an astronaut, while the astronauts are up there. Someone that has a similar experience to what they're experiencing. So Capcom is a throwback to the Mercury days, because of course it was the capsule. So that's what they call Capsule Communicator, or Capcom. Each one of these other stations all perform a different function. Some of them are in charge of thermal, some of them are in charge of communication, some of them are in charge of data systems, other ones are flight controllers, some control the power consumption, the cooling. Everything has a function. And that room that we're in before, the MER, like I said, there's like dozens of rooms like that in this building, and each one of those rooms supports one of those positions. So you have the face that's here, and then you have anywhere from 2 to 20 other people in a back room, working the details. And then it all goes in a big pyramid, goes back to those positions in the front room, and then it eventually goes up to the flight director. And if the flight director decides that the crew needs to be told something, then the Capcom is the one that sends that message up to the space station.
Right now, what are they doing?
Right now, we're just operating the space station, and you can tell where the space station is by this big board in the middle. So you see in the upper right-hand corner, you can see a little bit of a logo, an icon that looks like the space station with the solar arrays in the upper right corner of the big screen in the middle. Mm-hmm. So right now, it's just off the coast of eastern Russia. And you can see it every now and then. You see it move just a little bit, and then the white tracks, looks like a parabola. That's the track over the Earth. And again, you see that one goes quite high and quite low on the Earth, because the space station's at an inclination of 51.6 degrees to the equator of the planet. So it's basically going like this while the planet is spinning underneath it. That's why it gives you that track that looks like that.
Is this the place where everyone cheers when they land not when they land, but when
we do something good.
When you do something good, yes. Is the place where everyone, we did it, we made it.
So this is where the original Apollo mission control was. When you see the movies and all that, you see that was this room right here. Okay. Now, it was converted to be the Space Shuttle mission control. And that's when I started working it in 1987. Mm-hmm. But then you had all sorts of back rooms. But then they eventually moved the Space Shuttle mission control to another part of this building while they refurbished this to make this the Space Station mission control. Now, directly above us was another room that was called the Black Ficker. Mm. So this is the white Ficker. So this is the ones that were public missions. And the Black Ficker, the ones were Department of Defense missions.
So we don't know what's happening there.
Oh.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's do it like that.
And you know the right saying, right? If I told you,
I don't want to know.
I'd have to kill you.
I don't want to know.
Now you see all the mission patches here? These are all the ones that were flown out of this room. Okay? Mm-hmm. So you only put that patch up, or the mission symbol, in the room that it was controlled from.
So this was the room that received the message, Houston, we have a problem.
Right here. Oh. This is where it was. It didn't look like this.
13, we've got one more item for you when you get a chance. We'd like it to stir up your cryo tanks.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
5 guidance. Go guidance. We've had a hardware restart. I don't know what it was.
Okay. Houston, we've had a problem. And we had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning there.
Upstairs, there were missions that were done for the Department of Defense, and my wife worked on those. So she actually worked with the people in that room. She actually trained them. She was a flight control instructor. So she trained the astronauts and she trained the flight controllers to deal with various malfunctions on various missions. So that was the black Vicar, and they were identical. So back in the Apollo days, the rooms looked exactly the same. And the idea was, and everything was redundant. So every screen that you had here, every console, every power supply, every communication loop, everything was here, and then a separate duplicate version was upstairs. So if for some reason, some systematic problem, you blew a huge breaker or power supply or something, it took down a bunch of this room, everybody could just leave their stations and run upstairs, and the same stations were all operating at the same time up there. And then we would do that. We never had to do it. They simulated it a few times. And then of course there's things that you couldn't really simulate. So those were called green cards. And the guys, my wife was one of the people that would do these things, and they would hit you with a green card. I remember one of the ones they did to a flight director was during an LOS. LOS stands for loss of signal. So the way it is, again, here's the Earth, here's the space station going around the Earth. We have what's called TDRS satellites, tracking relay and data satellites. They're up at a much higher orbit. They're stay in the same position above the Earth at all times. They're in a geosynchronous orbit. Well, we only have enough of those to cover so much of the orbit. So there's gaps in coverage. So there's times when you cannot communicate with space station, or they can't communicate with you. Those are the LOS periods. Right now we're in an AOS, which stands for acquisition of signal. So, of course, what does everybody want to do during an LOS? Well, go to the bathroom. It's the restroom break. So, and then there's like a break room over here by an elevator. You can go get snacks out of a vending machine, just like everyone else at work. Well, during one of the sims, during an LOS, the flight director went to the break room or whatever, used the elevator, and there was one of the simulation people standing in the elevator. So he gets in, pushes the button, door closed, guys pulled out the green card and said, "You're stuck. This elevator just broke down. You cannot leave. I hope you went to the bathroom already." It is what it is. So now AOS comes back and everybody's looking around. Where's the flight director? He never came back to the sim because he was stuck in the elevator. And now the rest of the team has to figure it out. Whatever they throw at him, somebody else has got to fill in. So they try to make it very realistic. We always train simulations that are much worse than you think could possibly happen, because if you can deal with this, then in real time you can deal with that.
Yeah. And your wife is the one that takes out the green.
That's what she used to do.
It's fun because I imagine your relationship at home. Her that takes out green card at home and
Well, I get those all the time.
Yeah.
But they're not simulations.
Real stuff.
It's real stuff. I have to deal with it.
Ken, what do you need to work for NASA?
The most important thing is education. Typically some sort of technical engineering, science, physics. That's the number one thing they're going to look at to decide if you're qualified to work at NASA. And it's a highly technical job. And it's, if you're into that sort of thing, if you're a nerd, that's really good. We are sort of the epicenter of nerddom here. And, we love it. We live it. It's a lot of fun. It's very gratifying to be able to do stuff like this and to make things work in space, because it's not the normal environment. There's a lot of things that'll surprise you in space. It's a difficult place to live. So we're now going into the SVMF. That stands for Space Vehicle Mock-Up Facility. So if you were on the visitor center tour, you'd be up there looking down at you right now.
Oh.
That's the visitor center tour. That's what you get to see.
Hey.
Want to drive?
Wow. Can I press that one?
Big red button? No. Never press the big red button. This is called Robonaut. Orion is the new spacecraft for going back to the moon and going to Mars and elsewhere. I'll take that.
What's that?
This is what's called the flight deck of the space shuttle. You're the commander. Go ahead.
He's on the left.
He's on the left.
sink our ass, man.
Però vorrei chiedere proprio a te, Luca Parmitano, qual è secondo te la ricetta della felicità per un astronauta?
Io sono convintissimo che la felicità